In the late 8th century BCE, Lachish stood near the front line of Judah's survival. It guarded the Shephelah, the low hills that connected the coast to the interior, and it controlled the roads that carried grain, olive oil, and troops. That made it more than a town. It worked as a fortified gateway, a place where warnings arrived early and where an enemy's advance could be slowed. Judah depended on that gateway because the west stayed exposed. Across the wider region, stronger empires rose and fell, and their armies moved along the same routes merchants used. When pressure came from the great powers of Mesopotamia, it came through these hills first. So Lachish carried a double burden. It had to feed the kingdom's economy in peacetime and absorb the first Udar when war threatened. Far to the northeast, Assyria expanded into a machine built for conquest. It demanded tribute, punished resistance, and turned whole regions into sources of wealth and manpower. As its reach stretched toward the Mediterranean, Judah's borderlands became more than a distant concern. They became a target list, and in that list, Lachish mattered. If Assyria ever fixed its gaze on Judah, this city stood in the way. Then the balance shifted at the top of the empire. Sennacherib became king of Assyria, and he inherited lands that stretched far beyond his core homeland. But inheritance also meant unfinished business. In the west, distant cities and small kingdoms tested the limits of Assyrian control. For a new ruler, that kind of defiance carried a dangerous message. If it went unanswered, it spread. Sennacherib responded with a clear policy. Rebellion would not just be defeated, it would be displayed. His campaigns aimed to make an example so loud that other regions obeyed without a fight. This was punishment as strategy. The goal was simple: break will, not only walls. When the West hesitated, Assyria moved to turn hesitation into fear, and fear into submission. That decision changed what war meant for the people on Assyria's frontier. A challenge to imperial rule no longer brought a quiet replacement of leaders or a negotiated tribute. It brought a public lesson. Cities that resisted risked destruction that could be pointed to for years afterward. Under Sennacherib, violence became a message sent ahead of the army, and it travelled faster than any messenger. Sargon the Tau's death broke the spell of Assyrian control. Across the Levant, rulers and city leaders tested the moment, weighing the risk of obedience against the hope of slipping free. Old grudges surfaced fast. Tribute felt heavier when the king who demanded it was gone. Messages moved along trade roads and border tracks, linking places that had once rebelled alone. This time, defiance started to look coordinated. In Judah, King Hezekiah faced that same calculation. Staying loyal meant paying, bowing, and accepting Assyrian pressure at every border. Joining the unrest promised pride and independence, but it also invited disaster. Hezekiah's choices pulled Judah into the wider revolt taking shape to the west and south. Once that step happened, it stopped being a local gamble. It became a challenge to the empire's authority. Assyria never treated rebellion as a misunderstanding. It treated it as a contagious threat. Sennacherib inherited a region that had started to move, and an empire that demanded a hard answer to keep moving itself. The longer defiance lingered, the more it encouraged others. So the pressure built in only one direction. Retaliation stopped being a possibility. It became a schedule. In 701 BCE, Sennacherib's campaign pushed into Judah with speed and purpose. Assyrian forces moved through the countryside and the lowlands, taking one fortified place after another. Each capture did more than remove a wall from the map. It cut routes, seized food, and stripped Judah of places to regroup. Towns that fell became proof of what resistance earned. The invasion did not pause, it tightened. As the list of conquered towns grew, Judah's defences started to bend under simple math. Fewer strongpoints meant fewer soldiers, fewer supplies, fewer safe roads. The Assyrians did not need to guess where pressure hurt most. They followed the lines that fed the kingdom and protected its heart. The campaign became a sorting process. Isolated outposts collapsed first, then larger centres faced the choice of surrender or destruction. Now the invasion reached a strategic decision. Jerusalem mattered, but it was not the fastest way to break Judah. Lachish stood in the path like a lock on the door, controlling access between the coast and the highlands. If Lachish fell, Judah's spine cracked. The Assyrians aimed for the place that held the system together. They set their weight against Lachish, intending a result everyone would understand. At Lachish, the campaign stopped being a march and became a test of engineering. Assyrian crews measured the ground and started building a ramp toward the city wall, piling stone and earth under constant pressure to work fast. It was simple in idea and brutal in practice. Raise the attackers up to the height of the defenders. As the ramp grew, the safe distance disappeared. The siege began to close. To protect the builders, the Assyrians brought a moving screen of fire. Archers sent volleys upward to clear the parapets. Slingers added a heavier thudding strike, aimed at anyone who showed a head above the stones. Each burst forced the defenders back, even for seconds, and seconds mattered. The ramp needed uninterrupted labour. Covering fire created it, and the pressure on the wall multiplied with every layer laid down. Then the machines moved in. Siege engines rolled toward the rising ramp, built to batter and pry at a wall that had kept enemies out for generations. The defenders scrambled along the top, shifting to wherever the next impact threatened a break. They threw down stones, shot back, and tried to disrupt the ramp before it reached their level. But the attackers controlled the pace. The closer the ramp climbed, the less room the city had to breathe. The wall finally gave way. After days of pressure, the Assyrian ramp and machines did what they were built to do, and the defense line broke in a rush. Soldiers poured through the gap, and the fighting turned into a hunt, house by house and street by street. Anyone still holding a weapon faced no second chance. Others were cut down simply for being there. Lachish did not just lose, Lachish was made to collapse in public. Then the punishment became organized. Bodies were left where they fell, not out of chaos, but as a message. Prisoners were dragged out and selected, some for execution and some for display. Impalement followed, a slow, deliberate killing meant to be seen from a distance. The goal was not only death, it was fear that travelled. Survivors were forced to watch the price of resisting, while Assyrian officials recorded the results like a completed task. Humiliation finished what the assault began. Captives were paraded, stripped of status, made into proof that the city's power had vanished. Leaders and fighters were treated the harshest, shown off as warnings rather than handled as regular prisoners. The violence did not end at the city gates. It was aimed outward, toward every town that still hesitated. If Lachish could be broken like this, the next place understood what awaited. That was the point. After the killing ended, another system began. Assyrian officers treated the survivors like inventory. Captives were brought out, counted and recorded. Names mattered less than categories. Fighters, craftsmen, farmers, women, children. Each group got separated for a different fate. Some people got marked as especially valuable, not because of who they were, but because of what they could provide. The conquest kept moving, but it now moved through paperwork and control. Sorting decided everything. Skilled workers and specialists got pulled aside first because Assyria needed builders, metalworkers, and administrators across its empire. Others were assigned as labourers, servants, or field hands. Families got split when it suited the state. That was the point. A community that stayed together could remember itself, organise itself, resist again. A community broken into parts became easier to manage. The violence of the siege turned into a quiet machine of relocation. Then the marches began. Lines of captives left Lachish under guard, pushed toward distant regions they did not know, speaking languages nobody around them used. On the road, the old ties weakened fast. Local leaders disappeared, shared rituals stopped, familiar land vanished behind them. In Assyrian hands, people became movable assets, planted where the empire wanted labor and loyalty. The goal was not only punishment, it was erasure of identity, of place, and of future revolt. The killing and the marching were not the end of the operation. They were only the raw material. After Lachish fell, Sennacherib had the victory turned into a message that could travel farther than any army. He commissioned a set of palace carvings that recorded the siege as he wanted it remembered. Violence became narrative, and narrative became policy, fixed where visitors, officials, and rivals had to face it. These reliefs did not simply report what happened, they selected, arranged, and clarified the lesson. The attackers looked organized and unstoppable. The defenders looked trapped and overwhelmed. Captives appeared in lines, counted and controlled, like property moving under state authority. Punishment and order sat side by side, as if they belonged together. The conquest of Lachish became proof that resistance ended the same way every time, under the king's direction. By carving the siege into stone, Sennacherib extended the siege beyond the battlefield. The reliefs worked like an official record and a warning in one. They told allies what Assyria rewarded and enemies what Assyria inflicted. They also protected the king's reputation from messy reality, turning terror into something clean, permanent, and repeatable. Lachish did not just fall once. In this story, it kept falling again and again for anyone who looked. After the slaughter and the forced marches, Lachish did not stay empty. The empire needed the place to function again, but on its terms. New people arrived under Assyrian oversight, and survivors who remained lived under a different set of rules. The city's role shifted from a Judean stronghold to an imperial checkpoint. Control mattered more than recovery. The message stayed clear. This had happened once, and it could happen again. Power also shaped memory. The carved scenes of the conquest kept circulating as an official version of events, and that version outlived the soldiers who carried it. But time did not erase the physical cost on the ground. Layers of ash and smashed walls stayed sealed beneath later rebuilding. The ramp that had climbed toward the defences settled into the hillside like a scar. Even without words, the landscape kept a record of what force had done. Millennia later, archaeologists cut into that hillside and met the aftermath in hard evidence. They traced the siege ramp stone by stone and found the destruction layer where life had broken abruptly. Burned debris, shattered weapons, and collapse all pointed to a violent end, not a quiet change of hands. Then the images came into the story again, not as legend, but as a matching account. The archaeology and the reliefs lined up, the brutality held. In the present, the Lachish reliefs met people as museum pieces and textbook images, trimmed of danger by glass and captions. In Chapter 1, Lachish had been a working city, full of routines that assumed tomorrow arrived. That gap mattered. The carvings did not begin as art. They began as a message aimed at the living, aimed at anyone weighing resistance. The stone showed what Assyria wanted remembered, the wall breached, the captives processed, the punishment displayed. It turned a battlefield into a lesson that could travel farther than any army. A viewer did not need to know the language. The images did the work. They reduced a choice to a simple calculation: submit or become the example that taught others to submit. That strategy still reached across time because the reliefs survived when voices and bodies did not. Modern audiences approached them as evidence, as history, as something safely finished. Yet the logic remained intact. Power announced itself by making fear visible, and by repeating it until it felt unavoidable. The city of chapter 1 disappeared, but the warning it received stayed carved and legible.